Good afternoon. I guess you call me a Yank from US. I'm here, well, a little bit background on this topic. Whoa. My ears are still plugged from the airplane ride, so I'm kind of dizzy. This is one of those presentations that's sort of just in time, because basically I whipped it together on Monday night. And a lot of times, a lot of the content was kind of time sensitive too. But I am the device guy. And from that perspective, we're seeing the smartphone as really an extension of the different type of technology. And the device itself has become much more personal over the last decade or so. And pretty much it's in everybody's pockets. And moving forward to 5G, I think there's some fundamental changes to how we interact with our devices and how we use it in our daily lives. So the big thesis here is that in 2020, 5G will be mainstream. So if you recall what Dario said in the beginning, if we use 5G, if we use LTE as sort of a baseline, 5G at this point in the LTE's life cycle 5G is already nearly 2 years ahead of 4G. So we're building on all the learnings from LTE. We've clearly, if you think back into 2009, even take a break in 2014 and then last year, 2019, most of you probably have had a different experience or different usage and a different relationship with your devices over that course of time. And it's become so personal, and we all are essentially experts in this consumer product category. We know what we like, we know what we don't like, so it becomes much more of a conversation piece in a sense. So why am I making that? So I also mentioned foldables, and the reason why I'm mentioning foldables is because of the different relationship we've had with our devices over time. If you think back in 2009, you probably had a smartphone, even it's probably not 4G at the time, but you probably had used your smartphone more for calls, and then over time you've evolved into using it to consume a lot of digital content. That can be seen in the evolution of the smartphone to the past decade. We've gone from like a 4-inch display now to well over 6 and kind of brushing up against 7 inches. So what I want to talk about is both these types of concepts of how we're evolving and going into 5G, and where are the brands, like the OEMs, where are they taking these designs? So for the Mobile World Congress that wasn't, there was what ended up happening is instead of having all the announcements in one place in Barcelona, all these different companies are having their own live stream events. And it's kind of encumbers upon us to kind of track and listen to all those and bring that information together. But my thesis of 5G going mainstream, I've already told you that it's about 2 years ahead of what LTE at this very moment in time. One of the biggest drivers for that is component market, and namely the chipsets, the modems that really power our devices. And well, in the beginning of the year, in January, this was early in February, Qualcomm announced their third generation chipset. This is the X60. It's got some really unique features such as carrier aggregation between sub-6 gigahertz and millimeter wave. So since they've rolled out their first generation chipset, probably middle of 2019, now we're seeing the second generation 5G modem come in products shipping today. And the third generation we'll probably see that at the end of 2020. So that's a big driver for kind of creating more momentum behind the supply chain and the ecosystem. So another big, that's right there. Another big improvement is the arrival of integrated chipsets. And that is a big deal because according to Moore's law, if you integrate components together, you have less silicon involved, the prices are going to come down. So these mid-tier 5G chipsets that's available to us, the Qualcomm Snapdragon 765 being one of the leading solutions, are showing up in devices in devices that are probably at around $400 or sub $400. There's also Samsung LSI that has the Exynos solution, and that's the Exynos 980, and even MediaTek, who famously didn't jump into LTE for the first couple of years. They're coming from behind this. So the Taiwanese manufacturers had a conference in end of 2019 to show off their Dimensity product line. First with the 1000, but 800 is much more of a equivalent to everything else. So having the products available really gives the manufacturers the tools to not worry about the air interface and all the compatibility of 5G and so forth. But it also raises other design criteria. If we look at 5G at its nominal theoretical throughput, the speed at which the data is coming to your device is actually going to rival some of the memory read writes, specifically in the NAND memory or storage memory. So all those memory components have to be upgraded to really facilitate the fast-moving data that's the huge data pipe that 5G opens up. So we are going to talk about, sorry, I'm a little out of it today. We are going to talk about the 6 of the global top OEMs. Minus Apple. And Apple really doesn't have any new wares and any new iPhone designs until September when they have their annual event in Cupertino. So what we're going to look at first is something I wrote about a couple weeks ago, which is the significance of Samsung's Galaxy S20 line. I know it wasn't MWC related, but it just happened maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before the MWC. And the significance of their design, this whole series, is that every one of the 3 variants are 5G capable. And they're also adding in 5G antennas such as millimeter wave as well as sub-6. And the smaller one is only sub-6 because of the size and really it doesn't have room to fit all the redundant millimeter wave antenna modules. So that's I think a big boost to the industry, understanding that 5G is sort of the table stakes of new flagship devices moving on. Also, they've announced the Galaxy Z Flip, and this is the area where our relationship with the devices and how we use them really come to a head. Now, granted, this is a second generation foldable design. You can argue that it really is superfluous in terms of functionality, but it does bring a lot of a big cool factor. So the more conventional foldables, which I'll mention a little later, focuses on the evolution of how we use our devices. We're getting to a point where the screen size is nearly 7 inches. It gets to become very cumbersome to even put in your pockets. So the next step in the need to catch up and have larger and larger screens for better consumption is to basically flip a folded device in half, and that really basically resolves a lot of the ergonomic issues related with these very large phones that we're familiar with today. So on Monday, sorry. So on Monday, Huawei, actually, it's an interesting story. Richard Yu and basically whole Huawei team they flew into Barcelona in the beginning of February so they could self-quarantine and then make it to the to the event, which didn't happen, so they pushed it out a day, and they probably had a good 100 people, mostly from media, attending. So what's unique about the Mate X S is that it's arguably a much more improved version of their Mate X from last year. And the improvements really has to do with the flexible display, which has been ridiculed as being very kind of flimsy. They're using a ultra thin glass laminate on top, and it feels a little bit more like you're touching glass. And it's the largest foldable on the market today, full 8 inches when you unfold it. And I think as a device analyst, you're kind of double as a hand model, so that's me. But the big elephant in the room is the fact that Huawei is working without a Google services package. And that could be really frustrating. I've been testing this one out for the last couple of days. It's really frustrating to get around without Google services. So aside from the Chinese domestic market, they're going to have a very difficult time if they don't get Google services back in markets such as the EU and other global markets. So they're in a sense making up for it with really hardware and sort of a design tour de force in creating something like this. This is actually quite pricey at €24.99, which is about $2,700 US, about 2,100 pounds. So it's not a sort of a run-of-the-mill. People aren't going to rush out and wait in line to purchase this. It's really an aspirational product. But after you've experienced foldables, you immediately understand the need for it, because you have such a big canvas to work with, and it folds up so that it's actually portable. Next is the Honor View 30 Pro. Honor is a e-brand of Huawei. as many of you know. And they usually take Huawei designs and kind of decost it, take out a lot of the, take out the quality of the display, take out memory density and so forth to achieve a low cost. But in this case, the View 30 Pro 5G is actually using the same chipset as the Mate X S. Yeah, I guess it's called. Yeah, and they haven't announced a price, but it'll probably be around about $500 range, which is fairly high for their product portfolio. Next is Xiaomi. Xiaomi is the fourth global global OEM brand in terms of shipments. So clearly, the missed opportunity of Mobile World Congress, I think, really impacted, Xiaomi, the Oppos and Vivos of the world, as well as Huawei. So in that sense, even going to a sort of a value brand, we're seeing 5G penetrated into their designs. Oppo is, I think, the fifth in terms of shipments globally. And they had, again, huge amounts of advertisement in Barcelona, all over the place. Not just across one of the corners of the block, but also in the airports. So there's a lot of money invested in announcing this product that's basically, a lot of ad dollars going to waste. But they were slated to announce their next flagship device, which is the Find X2, and that's been pushed out to March 6th. But pretty much we know all the specs. It's going to be Qualcomm-based. It's going to be large screen, and probably north of $600 or so. Realme is an interesting one. This is a sub-brand of Oppo, and they sell mostly into India, Indian market, but they've been really accelerating their growth lately and creating a name for themselves. And again, they have an X50 Pro 5G. See the common theme of pros in here. That's really a marketing strategy following in the path of iPhones. So that's an interesting product release, given that India is a very cost-sensitive and cost-constrained device market, because the typical Indian discretionary spends are limited. So it's surprising to see that they are going into that 5G design. All right, so this one is Vivo, and Vivo is, I think, number 6 of the top 6. And they are China's 4th largest brand after, clearly, Huawei, Xiaomi, and Oppo. So they had plans to really focus on their concept phone, the Apex 2020. And the Apex 2019 was made a lot of ways being the first device that has basically no ports around it. It's kind of, there's no USB port, there's no recessed points on the device, and it's more of it's a concept phone in the sense that they want to show what's possible with design, and that would clearly be 5G, and also the iQOO, I think it's called, 3. That's more of a production ready version. Okay, so why is Sony here. Sony's clearly not a brand that's doing well at the time being, but they haven't given up just yet on their smartphone business. So the Xperia 1 Mark II, they like to keep that same branding as their Alpha series cameras. That is essentially Sony's first OLED display, as well as one of the very few 5G devices. And it's using the second generation Qualcomm modems and chipsets. And it's kind of stuck with their 21:9 aspect ratio. It's quite long. One of the reasons why the Galaxy S Z Flip is also very long. They're able to kind of fold it in half. But in this case, they're trying to support their parent company. Clearly, Sony has a lot of digital content they want to show in a lot of movies, and the philosophy there of 21:9 is that it's the perfect cinema aspect ratio to view a lot of those movies. What's really interesting is the other announcement, which is the Sony Xperia Pro. It supports not only sub-6 gigahertz bands, but also millimeter wave. So they have, oh, you can barely see this. So N260 and N261 is primarily in the 28 gigahertz range, which it's clearly designed for the Verizon network in the US. And what's really interesting about this is you can't really see it here, but 5 millimeter wave actually forces the hand of the designers to create around the limitations of millimeter wave. Millimeter wave is highly attenuated. If you put a hand over the millimeter wave antenna, it's going to basically block your signal. That's why they have multiple millimeter wave modules spread all over. And this one is interesting in the sense that the mid-frame, which is usually made out of metal, in this case is all plastic, all RF-friendly materials in a sense. So this really highlights the point that in the US market, designing for millimeter wave is a design that is a compromising design, because you have to look at what is capable of in terms of RF. Now, you don't want to have too much material, metallic material to attenuate, but you also want additional rooms for the multiple antennas. So that's a challenge. All right, so other OEMs that were also planning to have big announcements include Motorola, TCL, which is another Chinese brand. You probably know them from as the OEM behind the Alcatel brand. There's HMD, which is licensing the Nokia brand, ZTE, and also lots of 5G components. One of the biggest challenges in 5G right now is filter technology. And if you understand what the filters do, which is basically isolate your signal so that it doesn't kind of cross over to other licensed spectrum. So that's quite important. But the challenge right now in 5G is that there's really no good solution above 3 gigahertz. As the global deployment, the most common deployment is band N78, which is 3.5 gigahertz. So that's going to become more and more crowded, and the need for filtering technology is going to be that much more urgent. So the company named Resonant has been showing off their XBAR technology. That's really the only effective way to filter for bands 78, 79. And also other players chipset players like MediaTek had planned for an announcement and it did not happen. So again, so if we go back to what we've seen, if Mobile World Congress would have gone forward, this is probably the theme that we would read in the tech journals, which is this is the year 5G becomes mainstream. And also there'll probably be quite a bit of buzz around the foldable designs, foldable form factors. And just as we've changed our behavior from calling to more data-driven communication, 5G is going to kind of amp that up and create new use cases. So a 5G device may not end up being just a phone. It could be an AR glasses or wearable or so forth. So this is a way that 5G can kind of break that one device theory that everybody carries a smartphone. You do everything on a smartphone, but the essence of 5G is not just connecting people, but it's connecting people to things, things to things. So clearly, the industry is looking forward to that use case evolution. Okay, I hope I didn't stutter too long and say too much ums. Any questions?
No, I think
no,
we have
okay.
to go on to the next.
Great.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.